As you know, this week is National Retirement Planning Week, and April is Financial Literacy Month. So it's quite nice to be able to talk about the work I have done on these two topics almost over a time frame of 10 years, and actually show that not only these two topics are relevant, but they are actually related, and that financial literacy is an important determinant of retirement planning. What I'm really going to do today is almost take you through a journey of research done over more or less 10 years and try to summarize the work that has been done not just in the US but across country on this topic of retirement planning and financial literacy. And I'll try to summarize some of the highlights today of this work. And let me start indeed by talking about why this is relevant. And one of the reasons has a lot to do with the change in the pension landscape and the fact that so much more today in the US and in other countries, we see this increase in individual account, and we see moving from DB pension, from DB to DC pension, where people are in charge of deciding both how much to save and how to accumulate their pension wealth. This is a result of major changes in the labor market and the fact that labor market there is so much more mobility, and people have to be able to bring their pension with them. And individuals have also to make this decision facing a lot more complex financial market with respect to the past. So just to paraphrase an important book which has been written on this topic, we witness a really great risk shift, in a sense that moving from DB to DC pension and privatizing a system of welfare, we really see individuals being in charge of their financial well-being. And in my view, this is quite a remarkable shift. And if you think of a situation like in a DB pension where a CFO with an MBA in finance was responsible of making decisions about saving, and now we are in a system where Joe and Jane are actually in charge of making this decision, you can see that we have a very, very dramatically different system. And the question is, now that people are in charge of these decisions, what can we say about how prepared they are and how equipped they are to make these decisions? And this is actually one of the underlying questions throughout this presentation. How equipped are people to make these decisions that actually affect their well-being, for example, after retirement? The objective here is to assess basic knowledge. So that's why I'm such a fan of financial literacy, is in my view just the ABC of financial knowledge, and do people possess that basic knowledge? So what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes or so to take you to a journey of three questions that are aimed to assess financial knowledge. The first question we had to face, or the first kind of obstacle for us when we started looking at this question, Olivia Mitchell and I, is what do you ask if you want to measure financial knowledge? Do you ask whether people know the Black-Scholes formula so they understand derivatives? Or what do you actually ask? We thought that to make a decision on that, we needed to understand what are the important decisions that people have to make. And so we very much focus on saving and investment, also because we were very much focused on decisions related to pension. And in that framework, more or less the life cycle model and the portfolio choice are some of the major framework that we think about in terms of making people, for people to make these decisions. So if you look inside this simple, I don't even want to call model, but theoretical framework, what is critically important in this framework is a sense of value over time. So do people understand present value and can they indeed make decisions considering a lifetime of resources? To do so, they need some sense, of course, some understanding of interest compounding. And when you talk of resources in different periods of time, of course, people have to have a sense of real versus nominal value, because different period of time, if they have different price level, brings with them different purchasing power. So one of the two fundamental concepts we think are important for making decisions is an understanding of interest compounding and understanding of inflation. And to make also a portfolio decision, we think that another critical concept is the idea of risk diversification, the idea of investing in a basket of assets to reduce your risk. So the three main questions that have motivated our work is first, really measure this basic concept. And these are the questions that we are going to address, and I'm going to show in a moment what I mean by basic knowledge. And the question we really would like to ask is, how much do people know? Remember, we put them in charge now of all of their pension wealth, and we have given them a lot of responsibility in other areas as well. So how much do people know? The second, and importantly, who are the people who know the least? We want to identify, particularly for policy, the most vulnerable group. And most importantly, does financial knowledge matter? Even if we have shown that people don't know the basic concept, perhaps they are still able to make good financial decisions, perhaps they rely on good advisor, or they find ways to still overcome this lack of knowledge. And so it's important to show not just the level of knowledge per se or the most vulnerable group, but also to show whether this has implication or not. And I'm trying to do that today, and I'm going to in particular look at the relationship between financial literacy and retirement planning. So let me start with the very first question, how much do people know? I'm going to show you next the three questions we had designed back in 2002 to try to assess as I measure this basic knowledge. And when I mean basic, I really do mean basic. And let me show you indeed the question that we put in front of a representative sample of actually older respondent and then younger respondent, and also a representative sample of the US population. So the first question we asked was trying to assess interest compounding, but we actually went even easier than that, and we just wanted to measure, can people do some very simple calculation in the context of interest rate? So here is the exact wording of the question. Suppose you had $100 in a saving account, the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much do you think you have in the account if you left the money to grow? And know that we list the answer. We don't ask people to do this question in their head. You know, we list the more than one or two, exactly one or two, or less than one or two. And we also allow them, and this is very important, to let us know whether they don't know the answer, so they don't want to attempt to answer, and also whether they also refuse to answer. And this methodologically is very important because we just are not asking for people to guess an answer. We're really asking them to give them the best response up to their knowledge. Okay? As you can see, these are indeed very basic questions. They measure basic numeracy. This question originally, the first one was asked over the phone. The person on the phone doesn't have an Italian accent, so I think it's probably an easy question to even phrase on the phone. We have actually tried in different methods. More recently, we have an online survey. And so people can read the question and sit there and, of course, have time to answer. They can go online and look at the calculator if they want that, because at the end, decisions are not made on a quick amount of time. The second question we ask is related to the knowledge of real versus nominal value. We want to assess whether people understand the effect of inflation, and is again, in our view, a very simple question. And it is phrased as follows. Imagine that the interest rate on your saving account was 1% and inflation was 2% per year. After a year, with the money in this account, would you be able to buy more, exactly the same, or less than today? It actually took us quite a bit of time to phrase this question in this way. We want to frame it in the way in which I would say the financial industry communicate. So we want to use economic jargon. You can argue that this question is a joint question testing the knowledge of real versus nominal value, but also testing whether people know what inflation is. And at the same time, we want to phrase it in a way that reflects kind of their day-to-day financial management. Okay? The third question is trying to address risk diversification. And of course, we needed a more sophisticated question because we want to be able to differentiate across a respondent. And here is the question we have. We actually took it from the Vanguard survey. Back in 2002, we weren't really able to pilot these questions. And so in particular for this one, we rely on Vanguard. And we asked this question initially in 2004. It is phrased as, do you think the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual funds. So again, this is a test of knowledge of risk diversification and also of knowing what a stock and a stock mutual fund is. And implicitly, since we asked it in 2004, it's a question asking, do you remember Enron and what have you learned from it? I'm going to take you through a journey of these three questions because they were first added in a special module on retirement planning and financial literacy in 2004. This was a subsample of a population of older respondents. But after the results were released, the National Longitudinal Study of Youth, which surveys the young, became interested in this question. So we also have now data for the 23 to 28 years old. In 2008, we were able to add it in the American Life panel and look at these results across the whole population. And more recently, in 2009, they were added in the 2009 Financial Capability Study, which is one of the probably best data set to measure financial capability in the US, of which financial knowledge and financial literacy is one component. And more recently, in the past 2 or 3 years, we have been able to work with central bank and treasury department in several countries, in fact, as many as 7. And this question has been added in other countries in national surveys. And more recently, we were able to publish a comparison of these questions and of retirement planning as well across as many as 8 countries. And this is some of the work I'm going to show you in a moment. I have to say that one of the benefits of doing international comparison is that you get to travel to this country. In addition, we have actually worked with so many countries which I think are able to give us such a richness of data to be able to address questions really beyond the 3 that I've listed here. If you look at Germany, for example, here is an example of a country which was originally divided into 2 different systems, and we can see whether people who lived in East Germany, for example, has now a different financial knowledge than people of the same age and economic status, but who have lived all their life in West Germany. In Italy, for example, we see very wide regional differences, and we can see whether this translates into regional differences in financial literacy as well. And in fact, actually, a lot of this richness has been utilized in the scribe, in the special issues that I've mentioned before. But let's now get to see how the data compare across countries. I'm going to start with the US and actually tell you the result of the most recent survey we have done on this data and covering the whole population. So the statistics I'm going to report are statistics for the average person, which is spanning from age 22 on, and is representative sample. In order to make the data comparable, I'm going to use the national survey, but sometimes to do statistics across demographic group, I'm actually going to rely on some of these other data sets that I've used. And I'm very happy to report that we are now in the field for the second wave of the financial capability study. And so pretty soon we are going to have data on 2012, and we can actually compare whether financial literacy, for example, has changed after this very severe financial crisis. So how much do Americans know? And here is the distribution across the three questions. As you can see here, 65%, this is a telephone interview, were able to answer the 2% questions correctly, but more or less 1 in 5 Americans get this calculation wrong. In terms of inflation, we find again that 64% get the inflation question wrong, correct, and again 1 in 5 get this question incorrectly. The question that people find most difficult is the question about the risk diversification, where half of the sample is able to answer this question correctly, and the big difference with respect to the previous two questions is that a very high proportion, as many as 1/3, respond they do not know the answer to this question. And they do not know, or truly do not know. When we look at them, these are the people in a sense, who are not kind of the informed respondent, you know, who tell you, I don't know this answer, I have no idea. If you look at the percentage, if you want, of the people who answer the two questions correctly, half of the sample in the US, in a sense, know about interest rate and about inflation, and only 30% are correct about all these three questions. And I know this is hard to put this question in perspective, and that's why once we look at other data, it can tell us a little bit more about, you know, what is going on here, but compare, in a sense, this evidence with the type of decision that we ask individuals to do. You know, we are actually putting them in charge of making very complex financial decisions, but in fact, 65% only can do a 2% calculation. Now, let's start this tour across country, and actually let's start with Japan. And this is a data collected in 2010, and the questions are actually exactly the same, and we were able to work with them to exactly pin down the same wording. And what you can find here is that, you know, the Japanese maybe know interest rate a little bit more, but interestingly, they know less about inflation. And if you think of the experience of Japan, actually in the past probably more than 10 years, what they experience is deflation more than inflation. And the question about risk diversification is also the one that was most difficult to answer, where more than half of the population say, I don't know the answer to these questions. And of course, much less Japanese participate in the stock market than in the US. It might be helpful now to turn, for example, to Europe, and in particular to Germany. And going back to Germany, there are interesting classification we can study here. If you think of Germany, what we see is what we see, for example, in the PISA result as well, in the Program for International Student Assessment. You know, the Nordic countries in Europe tend to do relatively well in math, and what you see here, they tend to do better, for example, than in the US. If you look at the inflation, we find somewhat more knowledge than inflation, slightly more, but we find a very similar result about the risk diversification, where again, 1/3 of the sample, like in the US, said they don't know the answer to this question. As I was saying before, Germany is interesting because the unification of Germany is now 20 years away, and we can compare, for example, the people who were born and stayed in what it was considered West Germany and see whether their financial knowledge is different. If you think of life in a planned economy, there was no inflation, and certainly the stock market was not present. And what we can see is that even after 20 years after unification, we see that the people who have lived and stayed in East Germany actually know much less than the people who are in West Germany. And this is in particular the case about risk diversification. So maybe there is also a link between financial literacy and the experiences of individuals. I want to mention the Netherlands here because we have worked very closely with the Dutch Central Bank to collect this data. More or less is a mirror image of Germany, even though I know that the Dutch don't like to be compared to the Germans. But what you see here is very, very similar result, and in particular, the similarity of the result is the fact that the question, again, which really garner the high proportion of the do not know, you can almost see that this 1/3 of do not know is present across country, is really a stable result, a very robust result across all of these countries. Let me come back in a moment to the first question. You might argue that indeed this 2% calculation was a very simple question and it doesn't get at the risk, at the interest compounding. In Sweden, actually they asked this question differently, and actually I want to report what happened if we just increase just a little bit more the difficulty of this question, and if we really go for testing interest compounding and the fact that people have to know that interest builds on interest, okay? And I want to actually remind you that Sweden is one of the countries that has one of the top rate in the PISA test. So the Nordic country, as you know, all excel in math. So here is the question they actually ask in place of the simple 2% calculation. And the question is, suppose you have 200 krona in a saving account, the interest rate is 10%. After 2 years, how much do you have money in the account if you let the money to grow? So in a sense, you have to, you have to do the calculation yourself, and we are really testing, do you calculate the interest on interest, okay? And these are those intelligent Swedish people, blonde and tall and clever. So, but in this question, only 35% are able to answer correctly. So as soon as you make the question slightly more complicated, as you can see, the proportion of correct answer decreases dramatically. And this is a result we also find in the US data when we ask a question about interest compounding in the setup of debt and credit card debt. So again, kind of a common result that knowledge of interest compounding, inflation, and risk diversification certainly should not be taken for granted, not just in the US, but also in other countries. And we are continuing to work with a lot of other countries to add questions in their national surveys and really see what are the results in these other countries as well. Not only we want to measure not only we want to measure financial literacy, but we hope to be able to identify important pattern, and we also hope that this measurement will also potentially lead to intervention in public policy eventually. I want to turn now to not just the average statistics, but also look across demographic groups. This is the evidence across the whole population, but the question is, who knows the least? And I want to report, actually, one of the first graphs we did in the health retirement study, which is actually a very large data set. We use more than 7,000 respondents. And what you see as you look across age is this very, and I don't want to call it decline, but this low level of financial literacy at an old age. We don't know whether it is an age or a cohort effect, but certainly the level of knowledge is very low at an older age. And this is problematic because people still are making important decisions at that age. And also, that's the moment in which they need to manage their wealth the best, because if they mismanage their resources, this might be the time where poverty or financial difficulties must be more problematic. And interestingly, we have this finding in all of the countries we have seen. I'm just going to report Germany here as an example, but across country, what we normally see is a hump-shaped profile of financial literacy. It is lowest among the young and among the old. Another important consideration is look at financial literacy between women and men. And again, I want to start with the first graph we did in the health retirement study, looking at people who have made many financial decisions. These are people 50 and older. If you look at those groups, you see that there is quite a large gender gap in financial literacy. And women know much less, in particularly they know less about risk diversification when compared to men. You might argue that this is just capturing a generation effect. These are the older women that didn't, for example, participate in the labor market, that were less educated, and therefore this is not a finding we can see in the young. So let me actually show what we find when we look at the young, and here is the statistics using a very large sample of young responders, 23 to 28, where women here are actually even more likely to have a college degree than men. And in fact, even when we look at the young generation, we find a very large gender gap. So not just women know less when old, they also know less when they are young. This pattern, or the reason why we see a much lower proportion of correct answer, is not because women answer incorrectly to this question. What happens is women are a lot more likely with respect to men to say do not know. And this is actually a very important result because we find this pattern not just in this data, not just among the young, but we find it in every country. We see it in our international comparison. So in as many as 8 countries, irrespective of whether we are testing knowledge in Italy, in Russia, in the Netherlands, or in Sweden, we find there is a gender difference in financial literacy, and women are disproportionately more likely to answer we do not know to this question.
Can't do not know really be the right answer?
Absolutely, yeah. Let me actually turn to this. Is this good or bad? First of all, what we are capturing here is the fact that women do not know the answer, right? But in fact, it might be an admission of lack of knowledge, or it might be,
just be a safe
it might be a safe haven. In fact, I would like to argue that because of this result, women might just be the best decision maker, right? They don't know about this topic, but they know they don't know. And in fact, women are one of the most captive audience in financial education program. I have run a lot of financial education program, and I can tell you that 80% of people in the audience are women. So, I'm actually very glad of your questions because I don't want to attach a negative result here. I want to actually document that there is a very distinct gender difference in the way people answer this question. And in fact, women are a lot more likely to admit they don't know. And this can be really important when we do financial education program.
Well, there's also evidence that men are overconfident, so much more overconfident than women.
Yeah. So actually,
it's very strong from like psychology and so on.
Right. So actually, I didn't report this here, but we have information in our data set about self-assessed knowledge. And what we found is exactly what Pete was saying, which is when we ask about self-assessed knowledge, men are a lot more likely to give themselves higher score than women. Okay? So just to confirm what we were saying before, women do not know and know they don't know, while here, as you can see here, the knowledge in the population doesn't seem very high, but in fact, men tend to give themselves a higher rate. There is also another very important result that again speaks of the elderly population. There is a very important finding, and this we find it in all of the countries but Japan. When you look at the elderly population, as you have seen in the graph, they are the ones who know the least. And in fact, their scores are substantially lower than the average. If you ask them to self-assess their level of financial knowledge, they gave themselves the highest score. And that might be one of the reasons why the elderly are an ideal target for scams. They know little, they think they know a lot, and they are the one having the wealth. I have to say there is a very, in a sense, discomforting report from the Federal Trade Commission and also a study by a law scholar at the University of Michigan that document how the prevalence of scam among the older population, and also that the older population is now one of the growing and the fastest growing group that is declaring bankruptcy. We can actually use this data to look at other classification. And so we have looked at differences in regions, difference in race and religion. Let me report just a simple classification of financial literacy across state. And as you can see here, there is a very wide distribution of financial knowledge. You see a little bit, almost a south-north divide, but it would become a very clear north-south divide if you were to look, for example, at Italy. Let me turn now to the third question, which is probably the most important one, but does it matter? Does this lack of knowledge really bring consequences, and does it affect, for example, retirement planning? I'm going to focus in particular on retirement planning because it's a very important way in which we can measure, for example, whether people are forward-looking. Not only, but retirement planning is one of the most important predictors of wealth. And I'm going to try to describe it in a very simple graph. And this refers to data from the Healthy Retirement Study, looking at people 10 to 15 years away from retirement. As you can see here, the people who have done actually some planning, I'm going to show in a moment the word to describe planners. Planners have 3 times the amount of wealth of non-planners. Of course, the people who plan have different characteristics, but even if you account for all these different characteristics, so even if you look at people which are the same across many dimensions, but one is a planner and the other is not, actually the planner is going to end up with a lot more wealth than those who did not plan. So looking at planning is in a sense a good proxy to try to understand whether people have some forward-looking behavior and whether they might end up with higher amount of wealth close to retirement. Now, there are a lot of ways in which we can capture planning. And let me tell you, for example, one of the questions we have used to measure this type of planning in the financial capability study. The question we have used is very similar to a question that is asked in the retirement confidence survey. And note what we do here. We want to measure whether people have at least done some calculation. Okay, so we use this word to characterize, have they tried to do some calculation? As you can see from here, only half of the population in the US has ever tried to save for retirement. But you can think that there are other proxies for retirement planning, so we don't have to be so specific about doing calculation or not. Okay? So this is actually another question we have used to measure retirement planning, both in the US and in the Netherlands, which is even simpler. Have people given any thought to retirement? Okay? So even if you don't make potentially a calculation or a complex calculation, have you at least make some plan? Have you given any thoughts to retirement? Okay? There are also other measures that we can think. For example, you might not plan for retirement because you are really participating in a pension plan. And that's your way to plan for retirement. And that's, in fact, one of the other indicators of retirement planning we are using in some of these countries. For example, in Italy, where there is this movement toward this defined contribution pension, we are looking at whether people participate in a pension account, in a private pension, and the same in Russia. So we have a variety of retirement planning that really goes from a more academic model to maybe a simple way to measure planning for retirement. Okay? So we would like to assess not just whether there is a correlation between these two variables, but also whether financial literacy causes retirement planning. And that's a hard thing to do because, first of all, financial literacy is not a gene. It's not just something you are born with and doesn't change. As we have seen in the case of Germany and other countries as well, it might change with your experience. And in fact, it might change because you do want to plan for retirement. And so these are potentially two endogenous variables, and we have to take account of that. And also, it can be measured with error. So it's actually hard to do this type of analysis. And what we have done here is try to use the fact that in the US, different states have used financial education in high school. So we can use that exposure to financial education to try to measure whether or not people have an opportunity to become financially literate in different states more than using their own actual financial knowledge. We have also information about the financial experience of others, for example, parents and siblings, and we can use that as well to try to assess this causality. Does indeed financial literacy cause and has an effect on retirement planning? Because we have so much information and data on as many as 8 countries, we are actually able to use that richness to try to address this problem. But let me turn to some of the simple results. And what the simple results here tell us is for people that are able to answer all of these 3 questions correctly, they are 9 percentage points more likely to plan for retirement. And this is true both in the OLS and in the instrumental variable estimation. Is also we find very similar result, for example, in the Netherlands, which is the country that shows the highest, actually, importance of financial literacy. And as you can see here, if you are able to answer all of these 3 questions correctly, you are 12 percentage points more likely to plan for retirement. But the most important result here is irrespective of the country we look at, we always find, both in the OLS and the instrumental variable estimation, an important positive effect between financial literacy and retirement planning. You might argue, but what is the most important variable? Which type of knowledge matters the most? And here is some result about these 3 different questions. As you can see, both in the US and the Netherlands, and actually in a lot of other countries as well, the knowledge that seems more important is the knowledge about risk diversification. And this is because it's mostly a proxy for more sophisticated knowledge. So if you know about risk diversification, you are 8 percentage points more likely to plan for retirement in the US. Actually, in the Netherlands, knowing about interest compounding as well also allows you to plan more for retirement.
Maybe I missed a little bit of your explanation of the instrumental variable model, and maybe this is capturing that. But it seems to me that retirement planning is something that goes on over time, right? Mm-hmm. So wouldn't people learn about diversification throughout the process of retirement planning? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's why ULS estimate, you are probably capturing both effect, and they might be capturing this reverse causality as well, right? So I wouldn't trust ULS estimate as much, but the IV estimate try to address that a little bit more. The IV estimate here, we use exposure that you had in your high school, whether you had financial literacy in high school, so before you made any financial decision, right? So you can think that that exposure is more exogenous, right? Because it's really knowledge that you had when young, which might also speak of the fact that financial knowledge at school might be an important way in which people acquire their financial literacy. So as you can see here, I'm not reporting the result for all of the countries, but we do find a positive correlation between financial literacy and retirement planning across country, and is one of the highest correlation is found in the US. This is actually a topic very important to me because I actually wrote an entire book about finding a way to overcome this lack of retirement saving close to retirement, and covering, for example, financial education program that then increase the way in which people are able to plan more for retirement and overcome this lack of retirement saving. More recently, Olivia Mitchell and I edited a book which is really, again, highlighted the importance of financial literacy in this retirement security, and covering, again, more modern and also across country evidence of financial education program that might be effective ways in which we can help people prepare for their retirement. And I just want to mention a couple of those programs. We think that ideal venue for financial education are the school and workplace financial education. Let me turn in particular to the workplace. And one of the programs we have done recently is actually a project for the New York Stock Exchange Foundation, doing a set of financial education programs for the big firm. And what we did here is try to set up a set of education programs that any firm can adopt if they want to start financial education in their workplace. And we really add 3 levels of financial education that the firm can choose, from the most basic one, where basically everything is automated, but we think that you cannot stop at automatic enrollment. If you adopt automatic enrollment, that you have also to do automatic escalation, and you have to also choose some way in which workers allocate their asset, for example, target saving fund or life cycle fund. There is a more advanced, a more intermediate level where the employer can do more, for example, not just looking at their saving, but taking a more holistic approach on what workers do, and in particular try to help with that and that management, until a more advanced level where you can provide a much more comprehensive kind of help for financial decision, like a financial fitness test, including retirement seminar and so on. The workplace seems such an ideal place where to do financial education, because that's where the older population is, and this is where they make financial decisions. Let me conclude by saying that across 8 countries, we see little evidence that people know the basic concept for making financial decisions, and that this is important because it's linked to retirement saving, and there can be cost of financial literacy both at the macro and the micro level, and that's why financial education might be an important way in which we can address financial illiteracy, not just in the US, but in other countries as well. And I probably have to stop here because my voice, I think, wouldn't do much more. I'm going to ask our 2 discussants now to come on the podium, and we're going to ask by asking them a couple of questions first, and I would like to engage in really in a discussion with the public. Kathy, I'm going to start with you, and maybe start with few remarks about, in particular, I think, coming from the IRI, what's your view on kind of retirement saving and financial illiteracy?
Okay. Of course, this is National Retirement Planning Week, and the Insured Retirement Institute, in conjunction with 40 of our coalition partners, have been out this week with media tours and trying to get education and information out to Americans to see if we can help them start socking away some money for their nest egg and growing their retirement savings. I think we all know that millions of Americans are woefully undersaved for their retirements. Annamaria has been doing financial literacy research and the research on savings for over 10 years. Last year, the Insured Retirement Institute began our first year of doing research around baby boomers, since they are the closest to moving towards retirement, and we have 79 million of them. I like to use that number. It's 77 million Americans plus 2 million immigrants who've moved to our country over the last 40 years who are moving through this, everyone calls it, it's the rabbit inside of a python. It's going to be huge. With the pig in the python, it's going to be a huge issue in this country and around the planet. So as the second year of this, last year, of course, we saw that the confidence was way down among baby boomers around retirement, around feeling that they had enough assets to make it all the way through retirement. And so we thought that maybe, as we were starting to see economic recovery this year, that we may see some increased confidence. And what our research that we just released on Monday said that the confidence is even down more. And they don't believe that it's going to get better for them for 5 more years. And so their confidence is low. They have become very risk averse. We know that there's trillions of dollars of money sitting on the sidelines today. I'll tell you that I'm one of them that has money in cash. We're getting less than 1% in interest for fear of losing that 40% that I lost back in the downturn. So I think we have some real issues here with these boomers around trying to figure out how to help them move forward, to move out of this lack of confidence and to move out of a risk-adverse environment, because that's the only way that they're going to catch up, is getting back into a savings mode and a mode where that they can receive some type of rate of return. Annamaria talked also about the shift in the United States away from the defined benefit plan and moving to the defined contribution plan. And I think that's also an issue for literacy around retirement savings, in that when you signed up, when you went into the workplace and you got your defined benefit plan, you knew that was your pension. And you participated and you knew it was going to come your... Well, it's all on your back and the defined contribution plan, if you're lucky enough to be in the 50% of Americans that even enjoy a workplace plan today. And so the risk, to the decisions around how that's deployed. And I think that the other thing that I see is that everything that we do around savings is around accumulation. And so it's around savings, it's around building. What we have got to figure out around literacy, I think, in a going forward way, and getting people prepared and ready for retirement. And as you said, that if as literacy goes up, they build a plan, is to teach around how it is you turn savings into your lifetime income, and how you deploy assets. How do you take Social Security? How do you take the other accumulated assets you have and turn that into income that lasts a lifetime? And what we did when we went to defined contribution in America, we basically took the institutional model. What did we do for America's great institutions as they did their investments? And we took it down through a funnel and built it into individual savings. And so that's the way we think, is investments, investment returns, and then it's accumulation. And we've got to learn and move into education and literacy around how do we make that last a lifetime. The biggest issue for this group of people is longevity. They're going to live longer on the face of the earth than any generation ever has before. And I think there's just beginning to have a wake-up call around the fact that we are going to be here a long time, and you start thinking about how it is that we're going to make it all the way to the very end with the assets that we've accumulated. And then lastly, I would just say that I don't believe that we have enough knowledge to understand what are all of those risks that we face in retirement. You factored in a few of them, but there is so many more risks as you move into there, because you're not bringing home a paycheck anymore. That's what we rely on to get us through week to week, month to month, year to year when you're in the workplace, and the risks become so much greater. And you have longevity risk, and you have market risk, and you have asset allocation risk, and sequence of returns risk, and excess withdrawals. You take too much money out over the course of 1 year, and now and then you think, well, I lived on that, and I'll take that much next year, and all of a sudden it's so. Inflation risk, health care risks, and then you end up with those risks of diminished capacity. So there's so many more things that we've got to teach, I believe, and we've got to double down now and begin getting people to save more, take care of themselves first, because they're taking care of their security when they leave the workforce. And we've got to teach them about all those risks that they've got to protect against. And we've got to get people back to becoming savers. In this country and around the world, I think that some of your slides show this isn't just an issue for the United States. This is going on around the globe. And I think that your work on literacy and the work that all of our coalition partners, many of them are governmental agencies, are doing, are moving that needle a bit, but we've got to move the needle a lot further, a lot faster to get this baby boomer population ready for retirement. They may redefine the word retirement. One of the things in our research said, it says, how are you going to have income in retirement, was one of our questions. The highest percentage, like 64%, said, well, I'm going to work in retirement. And this is like, what is that? The definition of retirement, if a paycheck that you're receiving from work. So some of that's because baby boomers may never leave the workplace. They may have, they're calling it encore jobs, that they're going to go, that they may come and go. They may choose to be entrepreneurial and be small business owners, or they may work part-time. But they're going to redefine it. So it's going to change the dynamics for all of us and for the generations who come after, and it's something that we all have to pay attention to.
Thank you very much, Katie. I'm going to turn to Mark and ask about his comment about both retirement planning and financial literacy.
One of the disadvantages of going last, most of what you were going to say has already been said, but there are a few thoughts I would like to share. At Access Advisors, we work with clients and help them make good financial decisions. And clearly there's a lot of complexity, not only dealing with what to invest in, but how it impacts with tax laws and changes. So there's a lot of moving parts. But the one thing that's clear, being a dad of two boys, when young people get out of school, they don't know enough about making good financial decisions. And I believe that those who are out of school, we do have to educate them in the workplace. But I have a pet project, and that is to somehow bake into our schools education at the youngest ages. I believe it should start at kindergarten, not middle school, not high school, but kindergarten. And I also have another personal bias, and this is a personal bias, that the word literacy, I think when most of us hear it, we have a negative connotation as opposed to a neutral or positive connotation. So I would encourage that we have a financial knowledge week or financial knowledge month that gets baked into our school programs. We do have time for a lot of other programs in our schools, and Kathy at an earlier discussion mentioned how sex education is now part of our school curricula. I think financial knowledge is important to be put in our school curricula at a very, very young age. And again, I would advocate, let's start at kindergarten, where it's an exciting thing. Once a year, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month, it gets added to the curricula, and we not only have it, but we have to educate the educators on how to present this material. And I've built a whole program personally around it because I think it's that important. Just a few other thoughts I have. In working with clients over the years, I have found that many of them, well, I'll go back, most of them spend more time planning their annual family vacation than they do the retirement. Now, if you think about it, the typical family may spend 1 or 2 weeks away at a nice vacation. Retirement for most, we hope, is more than 1 or 2 weeks, but yet little attention is given to this topic. So I'm not sure how we work on that. I think it's somewhat public relations, somewhat marketing, but to think about when you're planning your family vacation, use that time to plan your retirement, because it is not being addressed. It's being either avoided completely because people don't want to deal with the problem, they don't want to seek help for the problem, they don't want to educate themselves about the problem, but somehow we have to bake it into the way we think as a society. The other question I'd have for you, Anna, if we look at all the European Union, I wonder if Germany is the most knowledgeable and who happens to be the most financially sound in the European Union. I don't know if it's a coincidence. I wonder if we went to, again, I have no idea, you have the knowledge, you'll gather. If you went to Greece or Portugal or Italy or Spain, I wonder where they would be on that dynamic continuum of knowledge compared to Germany. So maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe there's something to it that the population on average is more knowledgeable, their government's more knowledgeable, and that has permeated through the finance system. Just a few thoughts, since Kathy took most of the others.
I'm going to try to answer to your questions. And actually, I didn't report the evidence for Italy, but in fact, when we look at this evidence, it's really much lower than in Germany. And we are now pursuing these surveys in Spain and hopefully Greece and Ireland, and really try to assess kind of that knowledge. Of course, these are few data points, and I think what is really important is to go deep at the micro level and really see who are the people, for example, who took, those mortgages, who are the people, who face bankruptcy and so on, to try to understand a lot better your point, but this was a very important observation as well.
And another thought I have, we've been talking today about the financial part of retirement. There's a tremendous emotional and psychological part of it as well that gets intertwined, and it's hard to differentiate the two. And quite frankly, they both need to be considered. And part of it for people is to find another job, but how nice would it be in retirement to find another job or career because they would like to, as opposed to them having to for financial reasons.
I'm actually going to pick up on this point and see, because you have experience with clients, because you have so much experience with the retirement planning, whether you might want to offer some insight on this lack of planning for retirement that seems so prevalent. And even in the retirement confidence survey we saw today in 2012, just the percentage of people who plan for retirement is a small percentage, given the fact that we are moving to a defined contribution world. People are in charge, yet we don't see, in a sense, that forward-looking behavior that we expect, at least if people are really saving according to some life cycle model, or the fact that they should anticipate that the replacement rate is not going to be 100%. Can you offer some insight on this?
Well, I will start first. I'm going to go back to the defined contribution, is that I believe America's workers see it more as a savings account, or they see this rather than a retirement model. I had a prior career where I had 545 employees, and you would see young people leave, and they were going to take their DC money, and they would say, man, I'm going to go buy me a great big boat. I'm starting a new job. I was, no, that's not boat money. That's your, that's your retirement money. You need, roll it over, roll it into your new plan, put whatever. But people, I think that that's one issue, is trying to get people to think in the very long term around savings, and that those accounts are for that time of your life, as opposed to your current needs. I mean, we know that during this crisis, millions of Americans dipped into their retirement accounts just to meet day-to-day expenses. I mean, so we know that that's been happening, that they saw that as a savings account as opposed to the long term. The second thing is that I think we've got to you said forward-looking. I think one of your slides talked about forward-looking behaviors. I think for a literacy or a learning or financial planning aspect, we have to teach ourselves to be empathetic to ourselves and see ourselves in retirement, and making sure that we've taken care of ourselves there. There's these new models out where you put a photograph in and it ages you to like age 80 or 90, and you see yourself in this situation where you're old, and you have much more empathy to yourself, and you want to take care of that person that you see yourself as when you're that age. So I think increasing that long-term, forward-looking behavior, I think, can also be very important.
And from my standpoint, I don't think we're moving to a defined contribution world. I think we already live strongly in a defined contribution world. It is far and few places where you see defined benefit plans today, and still most of them are in the public sector, but many companies have either frozen, disbanded, moved to a cash balance type defined benefit plan, but it's a different world. And we have our analysis when we meet with clients where we handle their qualified plans or retirement plans. We're always looking at how many people are invested in just one investment or just two investments. And if they are, we're trying to get them to move into either life cycle funds, ones that are designed to make changes along the way, as opposed to most people just put it someplace and they forget about it. So it is a challenge to continually educate people, because even those that have made good, prudent investments, if they don't watch them regularly or have an advisor watch them regularly, the likelihood is what was good at one point will not be good shortly down the road if they don't keep after it.
Just one more comment. I think millions of them, our research says that a very high percentage of Americans view Social Security as their pension, and that is their retirement plan. And for many Americans it is, millions of Americans it is, but people see that as the retirement plan as opposed to the foundation.
Why don't we take some questions from the audience now, and I just want all of you to take opportunity to have really expert also from the financial industry to be able to ask this, to address questions. Ken?
Well, actually, I have a couple comments to build on what Kathy said. The primacy of Social Security and retirement cannot be underestimated. We have data from the current population survey, our supplement, from 1975 through 2010, showing that 4/5 of the elderly and 50% or more of their income in retirement from Social Security. And so the story of retirement in the United States is the story of Social Security. The other point about working in retirement, it's interesting because we've addressed this issue in the Retirement Confidence Survey over the years. And among workers, we find that it's been over the past 10 years, about 70% say, yes, I am planning to work while I'm in retirement. Yet, when we ask retirees, when did you leave the workforce? Over 50% say earlier than thought, and most times it's due to a reason that is beyond their control. Health being the number one, health of a spouse, or downsizing their company. So what we're finding is that relying upon work as a source of income retirement is not a really good option. And it goes back to this one issue of trying to hammer home the point, trying to get individuals to save. And it's Barbara here will tell you, it's a really tough sell trying to get people to focus on that one component of their lives.
Great points, thank you.
Just the simple thought of pay yourself first. You put money aside, take it off the top, pay yourself first. That simple concept could make a huge difference whether someone can retire or not retire.
Tony?
I'm impressed with the fact that insurance, taxes, and other considerations make it almost mandatory that if you are going to save a significant amount, that you actually engage a financial planner. I mean, it is a profession, and I was a professional economist. I would never trust myself to do my own financial planning. And of course, that isn't advertised to the public. By the way, I sympathize with financial planners because I have no idea what our tax policy will be for the future. So I actually think you have an impossible task, but that's okay. I'm willing to pay for it. But I note that, and I think that's a major issue. Okay, that is a major issue, is government. But I
say one thing very briefly, and then leave it really to people who are even have more expertise on this. And I want to talk about financial literacy and financial advice, right? Perhaps we don't need financial literacy because we can rely on financial advisor. But I think the problem is people who do not have financial literacy are even less likely to use financial advisor. So actually my point about financial literacy is that little knowledge might actually put you in a position to actually use a financial advisor and recognize that you don't know so much and you don't want to use all of your time acquiring financial knowledge, and it would be a good use to have a financial advisor. That's probably why you go to a financial advisor. And so I really don't want to take away from the fact that financial literacy can be so important.
In the practical world, when firms have retirement plans, qualified retirement plans, ERISA requires that there be a certain level of ongoing knowledge provided to employees. So in the plans that we work with our employers on, we will hold workshops there, and the reality is very, very few people show up. And in fact, those people who show up, the greatest percentage are the lowest compensated people. The people who are generally making the most money, maybe they're too busy, maybe they feel that, well, they have their own advisors, they rarely show up. So even though there are firms that have this available, companies that have it available, people do not go. I do think something needs to be more mandatory, or if it were a benefit where you have the benefit of X dollars and here's the counseling you get, then maybe people will take a better look at it, especially if it's customized to them. Because in the seminar, people may think, well, it's going to be so general, will it really help me? If it were something that was customized to them, perhaps there would be a greater value. But once again, that adds as an expense, and we're in a world right now where we're trying to move the other way when it comes to expenses.
Katie, do you want to
I
add?
think he covered it very well. And I think it is, we do need to do a better job in the United States of providing retirement planning, especially when there's workplace plans in place. I think that we all know that we can do a better job as an industry. Those people who are setting up the plans and bringing the education, and that we are going to have to do more and do better. And to really talk more about the income side of this as opposed to wealth building, as opposed to savings, as opposed to growing your, it's teaching that this all turns into your income for the rest of your life.
And that's an excellent point, Kathy, because there's a different art to growing and distributing capital. There may be some folks that are really good at growing capital, but the distribution side is a whole different issue, because now you have even potentially more tax issues involved, and certainly the longevity risk, and certainly the sequence of return risk. It becomes very, very different. And just because someone did a great job growing it does not necessarily mean they'll do a great job handling the distributions that will last in their entire life.
And to my point earlier, that this entire industry, financial planning industry, institutional investing, were built on all of these models. And that's what everybody knows. I think we're in uncharted waters as far as, because institutions don't die, right? Institutional, investing goes on forever. So we've never really focused in on how do we flip the switch for people into deploying it to the distribution phase of life.
And if I can just add one thought, I know we have a question back there. I think when I first began in this industry, and I won't tell you the year, but you might be able to guess, financial planning might have been as simple as going from bank to bank to bank, seeing who was paying the highest rate in a one-year CD, and it was somewhere between 12 and 15%. So if you had $1 million and you earned 12 to 15%, you would have 120,000 to 150,000 of income, and you can live off of that, hopefully. When you took out taxes and inflation, you probably didn't do so well back then, but you theoretically could live on that. And imagine if you were just living off the interest, and you still have that $1 million, and you're now going to bank to bank to bank today with that $1 million, and you're investing it. Knowing what inflation has done over that many years, it's actually over 30 years now, and looking what that $1 million would pay in a one-year CD today, don't think lifestyle will be quite as good. Maybe it's a couple gallons of gas, I'm not sure. I think we have a question.
On the accumulation side,
think we're attacking it now because last numbers I've seen, our savings rate has gone way up, and that's one of the reasons that we have somewhat of still the drag on a recovery, because people are paying down debt. They're getting tax relief, payroll tax relief. People are paying down debt. They're not spending quite as much. Will it change back? It probably will, because we're a country that's used to spending and seeing new gadgets and things, but I think we've become much better savers. Maybe not good enough, but much better savers. And the saving, I don't know if it's for retirement or just debt reduction. I think a lot of it is debt reduction these days.
I think you're right, but I do think that Americans have, I mean, we know this recession has had a tremendous impact on confidence and trust. So the confidence is, I don't want to lose ever again. You know, I lost 40% of what I'd saved up. So even if I wasn't a spender, even if I was a saver, I took a huge dip. And I don't want that to ever happen to me again. So I think that there's also that fear of what to do. Then the second deal is that we know in financial institutions, I mean, if you've got a grade card, the financial services industry from soup to nuts would get D's, D minuses, and F's as far as when it comes to trust. And we've got to rebuild trust into our institutions to get people to save in those institutions. I think that the lasting effect will create savers, but I think they're still nervous. So we're sitting on the sidelines. Where do we put this money where I don't lose it ever again? I don't want downside risk anymore. And so I think we've got still a lot of behavior shifts and changes over the next several years to watch. But I do think that the savings mentality has kicked in.
More questions? And as people think of more questions, I have one to ask, which is really related to the fact that as you look at the population, there are very wide differences across different groups. And so, you know, we want to be careful of this measure and these one-size-fits-all programs. And I just want to ask if you can provide some insight on the fact that we really need to start differently. We need to target, for example, women, older population, young population, and really be able to go to a more personalized service. So much more in other areas is done personalized, and I think in this area we are still thinking too much at the one-size-fits-all.
But yes, I think we are going to have to segment out income levels. We're going to have to segment out age levels, because if you have 30 years to save, it'd be very different than if you're 5 years out from. I think that women and gender differences, ethnicity, and I think there's a lot of different ways that we need to segment out as we move forward with literacy. We all have, because money is only, savings, money, whatever, is only an end to what your belief system is. So we have a long way to go, I think, in doing those things. So I think it's very powerfully important. One of our research it said women who now have more than 50% of the professional managerial jobs in the United States. Significant amount of women have more than $500,000 in investable assets. 95% of them identify themselves as the people who make the financial decisions in the household. They know how much groceries cost, they know how much PTA dues are, and school lunches are, they can tell you how much a pair of shoes cost, and they can probably tell you what the monthly budget looks like down to the penny. Have the least amount of confidence when it comes to investing and savings and having a good feel for what those assets, what they will do for them in retirement. I think that also has one big factor there for them is the longevity issue. That has created some real fear in women. But that is also, contributes to the reason that we need to segment down. Women have a different longevity than men do.
I would just say that from the advisor standpoint, I think it's important that we build a more diverse advisor base. Historically there have been too many not enough women, I should just say, in the advisory role. And I know as a firm, we are always looking to balance out between having male advisors and female advisors. And I think it's important to get the message out, because sometimes women would rather work with another woman in handling these issues. And the industry has been predominantly men for many years. It has been changing, but it's not changing fast enough.
Interesting. I'm going to turn again to the audience to see if there are any questions at the end. And I'm actually going to just maybe use one other moment to say if you have any final thoughts, and in particular if you have any recommendation for policy. You know, among the audience there are actually people who have an impact or are advisor to policymaker, and if there is any final word you'd like to say, it would be probably a good audience for that.
Well, this may sound a little simplistic, but this is one of my beliefs, is that you know, we do have a retirement crisis in America. We have the largest number of people we've ever had in this country marching towards retirement, woefully undersaved, who are going to live a long time. We are going to have, you know, more 100-year-old people than we've ever had before. And I believe it's almost like we need the Smokey the Bear campaign. We need the anti-litter campaign, where we taught Americans new behaviors. Somehow we have got to have a shift in how it is that we have, somebody said consumption society is how it is we have this balance. And everybody in America sees it, understands it, and plans for it, and that we do have a true behavior shift across our entire nation.
My closing thoughts are similar to my opening thoughts. I really believe that we need to start at the youngest age, and I think that'll start to permeate back at the home when they say to little Johnny or Mary or whoever the child is, what did you do today? Oh, it was Financial Knowledge Week, and I learned about compound interest, or I learned about why we need to save, or all the basic things that people, even in graduate school, still may not yet have the knowledge of.
The event for today. As usual, we will have a reception. It'll be in the 6th floor next door in the Duquesne building. And the way we get there is come through these doors. There'll be elevators. Take it up to the 6th floor, and there'll be signs to the reception. There we can continue the conversation over some food and drink.